Hi, I'm Chris Grandison. Welcome to Xenogenesis. Um, Last week I got a question in my comments section. That's a pretty good question, so I'm going to address it here in this short video. How does racism affect dating, entering, and maintaining a marriage? And the relationship is actually quite strong. So, a good example of how racism is having a large effect in marriage in the black population. A study I showed I think it was in my colorism video a couple of years back in 2022. So there's a study by Hamilton Goldsmith and Darity in 2009. It's called Shedding Light on Marriage, the Influence of Skin Shade on Marriage for Black Females. They found that 55% of light skinned black women were married. Only 23% of dark skinned black women were married. And this is because of the standards of beauty that are embedded into mainstream culture. And of course, that's been culturally transmitted into black culture of a higher value being placed on light and white skin and a lower value with regard to physical attractiveness and other important things, but absolutely physical attractiveness, a lower value is placed on dark skin. So if you look at that stat, 55% of light skinned black women being married and only 23% of dark skinned black women being married, this is clearly putting dark skinned black females, they're at what we would call in evolutionary psychology a selective disadvantage in the sexual contest for lighter skinned black females for the best, most high quality, marriageable black men. And you can check this out for yourself. So just go to the websites showing the wives and girlfriends of high value black men with high mate value. So let's say the guy's doing one in business or entertainment or sports. These are the guys high profile. They got that social cachet, making money, prestige. How many of them are either with light skinned black women or non black women at all, like Latinos or white females, compared to how many are with dark skinned black females? And I'm sure a lot of you already know the answer. Just think of the high profile black men you know. Are they with dark skinned black women? I mean, the only one who comes to my mind right off the bat is Denzel Washington. He's with a dark skinned black woman. But a lot of the other black men, and I definitely went through those websites myself, it's difficult. For every dark skinned black woman you see with one of these really successful black men, there are just tons and tons of light skinned black women or Latino women or white women with them. So the more successful a black man is, the higher the likelihood is either with a light skinned black woman or a woman who's not black at all. So, because a lot of these beauty standards, they actually do have something to do with racism, with negative associations um, of our physical appearance with negative traits like being less intelligent, less physically attractive, less well behaved, more incompetent, stuff like that. Um, that is going to hold down the ability of the average dark skinned woman to attract the same level of quality black man that a light skinned black woman or even a woman of another race that she can attract. So that's absolutely affecting dating, getting married, and staying in a marriage. So that is one of the big disadvantages in how racist perceptions in terms of the various forms of attractiveness of black people just having less, how it can affect the marriage prospects for women for sure. So race is a part of a status hierarchy. Now, status is where individuals and populations, groups, races, and other, identity groups, it's your standing in the social hierarchy, which determines the priority access to resources in a competitive situation. The higher you are in the status hierarchy, the better the outcomes are for you in that society. All the good things that society offers. When you're higher up in the status hierarchy, you get more of it. When you're at the bottom of that status hierarchy, you get the worst of it, including mating success. So, the sexual romantic relationships, the quality of them, the access you have to them, to the most desirable mates, that's definitely going to be highly affected by the status hierarchies we are part of. And skin color is part of the status hierarchy now. So, based on negative or positive associations with skin tone, it turns skin color into a cue of one's status. And because all humans have status psychology, where you can instantly compute those things upon sight, your racial appearance is then associated with a higher or lower status, and that will then affect how attractive you're perceived to be based on your race, even internationally. So I'm thinking about this Chinese study, or a study done in China by Westerners, that African Americans, in comparison to Americans in general, were perceived to be poorer, less moral, less beautiful, less polite, more closed minded, and less intelligent. And that's just based on being black. They don't know anything else about you. So, of course, that's going to affect your attractiveness, certainly in that society. So, if you're in China, your ability to, let's say, attract a Chinese person is going to be much better if you're a white person, because they've internalized Western beauty standards in China. And compared to white people, it's going to be much worse for a black man or a black woman in China. It doesn't mean, people aren't, black people aren't, getting married and into long-term relationship with Chinese people. They would. It's just in comparison to other racial groups there, it will be less based upon, you being black. There's really two areas, two traits that you're going to want to look at and say, does racism affect these traits? So one would be economic attractiveness, particularly with men. So socioeconomic rank in men is an attractive trait. Women all over the world pay attention to how well a man is doing economically. It seriously enhances his attractiveness. It can take, let's say, a below average looking man who's doing pretty well for himself with regard to his job, the money he makes, his ability to garner and control resources, displayed that he's got money, material possessions, a car, home, nice clothes, the ability to get things done, some competence and ability level. If he has these things, enhances his attractiveness significantly. But it tends not to do the same for women with regard to economics. And these are both dependent on the opposite sex. So we would call this the evolved sexual psychology of males and females. In many ways, they're the same, but in certain areas, they diverge. Women are more socially valued and critiqued for their physical attractiveness than men are. So women are more likely to be evaluated by men independently of their education and income, meaning their looks matter more. And again, this is through our evolutionary history. Uh, Men didn't really value women because of, whether they were a great hunter or a warrior, whether they go out there and garner a lot of resources. Men were going out there and doing those things for themselves. They handled their own security and protection, and they went out there and they handled their own material resource acquisition. But what men did need women for, what they were completely dependent on women for, was reproduction, to have children, and then for those children to survive. So having a child with a woman and then hanging around and supporting that woman and children, it really enhanced a man's reproductive success because he protected and provided resources for the woman and children. Those children will be more likely to survive. So this is part of how biparental relationships and pair bonding, it evolved through that, through a man offering something really valuable to a woman and women offering something really valuable to a man that each couldn't get, by themselves. So this supported this slightly different way that men and women choose their long-term mates, but also some other, differences in the sexual psychology of men and women. So in this society, one's socioeconomic status affects how attractive one is perceived to be. Now think about how money problems, let's say, end marriages or don't even allow marriages to start because a man, may think he's not making enough money to get married and start a family. We've seen this being a big problem, let's say, in South Korea, where the economic situation, the cost of living is so high that a lot of Korean men who would like to be married but can't get married because housing and raising a family is so expensive, and then they work all these long hours just to get, what they can get, they're less likely to ask a woman to marry them because they just can't afford it. So economics plays a big role in getting married. Now, of course, racism tends to hold down the economics of black people and black men in particular through, let's say, employment discrimination. So even with all the 21st century studies, we see employment discrimination is a significant issue. Now, from an evolutionary perspective, men want to build up their own status to compete with other men to attract the women. But they don't just focus on building up their own status, they also tend to undermine the status of other men. And we don't just do this individually, we want to do this group to group. So if we're talking race now, obviously there's a long history in the West of anti-black discrimination. So black men are held into more lower status jobs. It's more difficult for them to get the high status jobs that carry, better salaries. And this is one of the reasons for that type of discrimination, to reduce the socioeconomic rank of a group of males. It reduces their ability to compete with the other group of males for everything good that a society offers. Because along with being socially dominant in that society, you get the best material resources, and the men who get the best material resources, they're going to be found to be much more attractive to women. So this is one of the major reasons that men compete for that trait, because it's so valued by women. Men want to get it, and they want to get more than the men they compete against. And it's the same thing with physical attractiveness. Men want to be, physically attractive as well, but we know the big deal for men is status rank. Now, with black men, just in terms of being a dark-skinned black man, light skin privilege, it affects them most, not necessarily with just being physically attractive. It does affect them economically, educationally, and definitely in the criminal justice system. Dark-skinned black men are more likely to be harshly punished and given harsher sentences in the criminal justice system. Dark-skinned men are likely to be less educated and to make less money in comparison to light-skinned black men. So, of course, all of that is going to affect certainly their social and economic attractiveness, because dark-skinned black men are perceived to be more threatening, more criminal, less civil, less intelligent, and less competent. Now, being weaker in all of those areas, that's definitely going to harm your ability to attract and keep a mate. And this is one of the big reasons men use economic attractiveness to restrict it, to undermine it, to harm the ability of other men to get it, because they know it harms their ability to compete with other men for women. And all men, tend to do this. Again, none of this is about race. It's about being a Homo sapien male or a Homo sapien female. These are patterns we see cross-culturally across the world. But because of the level of anti-blackness that's embedded, not just in Western culture, but in global culture, it's going to harm black men and women in many, many ways. Part of that would be because we've internalized a lot of these anti-black social norms into our own cultures, so it harms how we mate within our own population, unfortunately. Another angle you want to look at this on how racism can affect dating and marriage, and from a black female perspective, is what is the quality of the pool of black men that black women get to choose from? So if racism is attacking the socioeconomic rank of black males, it is actually reducing the quality of black males that black females get to choose from for their mates. So black men doing well, black women marry those black men, that enhances the lives of black women and their family life and things like that. But with a smaller and smaller pool of quality black males to choose from, that gives black women a harder way to go, let's say particularly in America. Because, okay, here in England, over 40% of, let's say, Black Caribbean women are actually not with Black men. They're with men of other racial groups. But in America, I think it's like well over like maybe 85 up to 87% of Black women are with Black men. So if racism is attacking the economic attractiveness of Black men, it gives Black women in America a smaller pool of quality Black males to choose from. And then there are other behavioral consequences of that, with a smaller pool of Black men, quality Black men now to choose from. That makes the fight to get them, the competition to get those Black males, it makes that competition much more intense amongst Black women to get them. So this changes behavior. Think about it like hunger. If you're not really hungry, you're not, intensely fighting, competing with other people for the food. But if you haven't eaten for a few days, and everyone hasn't eaten for a few days, the fight for that food is going to be intense. It's going to be knocked down and drag out. So the intensity of competition between Black women in America for Black men is actually going to be quite intense, and that's not a good thing, because as I've said in several other videos, that swings that competition, the battle of the sexes competition, in the favor of the Black men who are desirable, not Black men in general, because a lot of Black men are going to be considered undesirable. But for the desirable Black men, they are in a powerful position to say, hey, you want to get with me, you got to do what I want to do. So as I said in several of the previous videos, it gives Black men more sexual leverage to get what they want, because if you don't do what they want, then you don't get the guy. And with the competition for those desirable Black men being intense, it means Black women are going to be more likely to do more of what a desirable Black man wants. And given the sexual psychology of males, when they have a lot of optionality, when they got a lot of desirable female options, it tends to be behavior that doesn't enhance a community, that doesn't really support family development, because lots of female options, you should know if you've watched several of my previous videos, it swings men, any kind of men, not just Black men, because we've done this research all over the world. It's going to swing them more towards casual sexual relationships, low investment, short term. So because you can't really invest a lot and be long term and still enjoy a lot of those female options. And from an evolutionary point of view, there's a lot of logic for men behaving that way, because men can really benefit from lots of sexual partners because they can have lots of children. Women don't benefit the same way, which is why women tend not to behave the same way when they have the sexual leverage. When women have the sexual leverage, what they tend to do is get the best partner they can at an earlier age. So when there's a high sex ratio, as in when there's less women around, but lots of men, you see women tend to get married earlier because they can find a good male mate earlier in life and get married to him. The competition for men is a lot less intense because there's lots of men around. And of course, the men are more likely to want to ask that woman to get married because there's less women around. So once you find a good one, you want to bag her up, you want to cuff her up, you want to put that ring on her finger before another man gets to her. But it's the opposite when there's lots of women around and not a lot of men. Now, racism has a significant effect on the sex ratio, particularly in the United States. So that's also a very powerful way that racism is affecting mating practices, sexual romantic relationships, and marriage, and maintaining a marriage, particularly amongst the Black population in the United States, but also here in England as well. A lot of those things are going on here too. So yeah, thanks for that question. Any other questions and comments you have? Go ahead and ask me those questions in the comments, and I can make some follow-up videos in the coming weeks.